Hello, everybody, and welcome to the TVP channel. Today's topic of conversation is, are the Springboks going to dominate the next 10 years of rugby? And is there anybody that can stop the powerhouse that is South African rugby under Rassie Erasmus? And just how have they gotten it right? Which is an easy and a complicated question at the same time, because it's right in front of you. I think is the easy way of putting it, and they don't make any secret of why they are successful. And yet, to replicate the success, to be able to replicate the structures and what's gone well for Rassie Erasmus, is an art and a mission that almost every other rugby team in world rugby right now is trying to do. And the question is, will any of them be able to get it right to the degree that they need to be able to match the type of Springbok dominance that we are experiencing at the moment? And it's amazing how you've got the likes of an All Blacks, for example, who are really struggling in the last few years with regards to kind of maybe losing a bit of their identity and their structures and their kind of their plans and the brand. You've got an Ireland who's gone right to the top and maybe is now fading off a little bit. You've got France, which are up and down a little bit at the moment. You've got England, who looked to be on the way up, but now on the way back down. And during that, what we have seen is a resurgent South African side, a Springbok side, which went back to back and then only got better. And the question is, how does Rassie Erasmus get it right? Because there are so many good coaches across the world. There are so many good structures, academies, leagues. We don't have the four best domestic sides in the world. We don't have the best domestic competition. We're part of arguably the second or third best franchise or club competition in world rugby, and yet we are the most dominant rugby side on the planet right now, with the kind of depth that no other team can really match. That does not mean we're going to win every single match from here on out. Just like India has more depth than any of the other countries in the world put together on a cricket field, they don't necessarily win every single tournament, but they do win a lot of them. Similarly, I think South Africa is in that kind of golden generation where they've got the kind of depth and resources they need to dominate rugby on a global scale. And the question is, what has changed? What has changed since 2015, where we kind of, we got bronze, but we never really looked like competing. We then went through a bit of a weird hiatus, and then Rassie Erasmus came back. Now, what did Rassie bring is the question. And if I say a plan, it sounds very simple, but it's kind of exactly what he did bring. Rassie is a visionary in that he has a very clear vision. It's not necessarily just because he's got this massive, huge, overarching, long-term, this is what we're going to do, type of attitude, but he has a very clear idea of what he wants, how to get there, what he knows, but also, very importantly, what he doesn't know. And I think what Rassie Erasmus does so well is fill up the gaps around him with the right people and create an environment for success, because the resources are there. Let's call a spade a spade. South Africa rugby and Springboks is probably the best or the easiest thing to get right, because you've got such good structures. The school system is incredible, now more so than ever, producing incredible talent. And we finally won the Under-20 championship a year ago. If we look at our Sevens Academy, which was started, and then kind of Paul True and was a big sort of driver towards that, and the sort of the progression under Neil Powell, which really revolutionized Sevens rugby, means that we are always constantly a Sevens threat. And the Springboks have always been one of the best teams in the world, but we are now starting to see an environment where at every level we look like we can compete, and we kind of feeling like the favorites. And because the structure is so strong, because it's a clear plan, this is why there can be this potential dominance for so long, because it's going to take so long for other countries to catch up where they have got major gaps missing. And yet at the moment, there are just no clear sort of chinks in the armor or gaps in the system for the Springboks. When you think about, for example, some of the positions the Springboks have to try and fill on a team sheet and the depth that they've got, we're talking about a situation. If you look at our centers, for example, we have got our top two most capped center pairing ever revolves around Damien Delindi and JC Kriel, and Damien Delindi and Lekanya. And that's not even mentioning Andre Esterhuizen, who's arguably one of the best rugby players on the planet at the moment. That's the kind of depth we're talking about. Before we even mention a Damien Willemse in the centers, before we look at some of the youngsters coming through. But what Rassie Erasmus did is he came in, he overhauled the system, and he created a road. And he uses the term road map, but he created a step-by-step process. What did he need for this revolution is the big question. And the answer is money. That is the answer. SA Rugby went to Supersport and went to the commercial side and said, we need you to back us. We've got a plan. We believe we can win the World Cup. This was back before 2019. And we believe we can get this. But what we need is we need money. And the question kind of asks, well, what is, how do you just throw money at the problem? And you've got to look at it, for example, even if you think about from a footballing sense, your richest teams and the success, your Man Cities, your Real Madrids, Barcelonas, Bayern Munich, Manchester United back in the Fergie era where they always had big name signings. Money often does equal success. Not always, but often does. Now, you're not thinking, well, it's a national team. How does sort of the financial part of it really add up? Because you're not buying players, but you are buying access to players, and you are buying an environment and a system that gets the best players you can get together to perform at the highest levels consistently. And what I mean by sort of that is things like the alignment camps. You think about the amount of players that we bring into a camp, an alignment camp, in-person alignment camp, and we fly players from around the country to Cape Town. We have the sort of 5-day, 6-day session, and off they go. You look at the type of squads, the size of the squads. I mean, if you go back to the test against Ireland and then Portugal, we had a 40 to 50-man squad throughout that time. Think about the cost of putting up an extra 20-odd players, considering a normal sort of squad's about 30 or 33. We're now kind of walking around with an extra 20-odd players. We're flying them in from overseas, locally. We're putting them up. We're giving them kit. We're providing all the meals for them. On match day weekends, we fly in families. When we go overseas, the families go with. The families were with the Boks the entire World Cup. We look at the coaching resources, bringing Tony Brown in, Jerry Flannery, Felix Jones. You're now looking at adding in, bringing in Dwayne Vermeulen immediately. We've brought in referee consultants. We've, obviously Rassie Erasmus is on a big contract. We go over earlier to World Cups. We do site visits. We go over earlier where we sent players over to New Zealand early, for example. All of this is because we have managed to create an environment where money is virtually not an object. And whatever Rassie basically decides we need to do, we get to do. Whether it's an extra camp, whether it's an extra few days, whether it's an extra few players. We've got the resources where we are not worrying about balancing books at the end of the day. And as a result, we've created such a big elite environment and so much dominance that we've now managed to take the Springbok brand, this badge over here, and taken it to a commercial next level where SA Rugby are bringing in close to R1 billion in just sponsorship revenue. That's how big the Springbok brand is going to become. The Greatest Rivalry Tour is going to be a huge financial injection. And this is why I say that it's going to be difficult to see how other nations catch up, because you can throw money at the problem. We are seeing Steve Borthwick having alignment camps. We're seeing other national sides go to bigger extended training squads and looking at sort of similar type of structures. The key difference is the depth that South Africa has in its rugby producing factory of players. And we've also managed to leverage where other nations like in New Zealand refuse to pick outside New Zealand and therefore basically cuddle their resources. We've taken a completely different attitude and said, go to Japan, go to England, go to France. Let those clubs cover your salary. Let them help you develop it. And then we get the best version of you back for the Boks. And it's the fact that we've embraced the globalization of rugby that has also been a massive key driving factor. We think about going to Japan, and not to say it's an easier league, but Japan has revolutionized South African rugby. We have used Japan as a tool to prolong careers, to get players into a different level of fitness, for example, to transform players from, what they were to what they can be now. And that's why we've got players like Alua Diago, who I think in the last year or two is probably running around looking fitter than ever before. And Japan has allowed us to do that. So we have looked at trying to maximize every single possible resource we have had without taking a very archaic attitude of has to be local, has to be done like this, has to be. And we've managed to create an environment where, yes, we talk about the privilege of playing for Springboks, what the badge means. And there is so much about that. And we've galvanized the country. You create an environment where the Springboks mean more than what England rugby means to England. We've been able to create a narrative where it is us against the world. He's always been able to, and Jacques Nielba was very good at that as well, being able to just find the right narratives to push, to find that extra inches, to be able to exploit all the different possible avenues of performance. And they've just gotten it right in almost every single way. They have taken the press on board instead of taking the press on, where the UK has a very fractious relationship with the press. What did the Springboks do? They invited the press in. I was there post 2019 and post COVID. We had a press day where we came in, we sat next to the players. I sat next to Ntuko Ngunu. And that was the whole thing. It was speak to the players. We are with you guys. We are one of you guys. And they got the press on their side. And as a result, they bought themselves favor with us and the country. Because by virtue of you leveraging the media, it meant that we were always going to be very slow to criticize. We're always going to try and give them the benefit of the doubt. And as a result, they've got that little umbrella, that safety net of a bit of failure before things start to get really hectic. Whereas if you look at overseas in certain, like look at Scott Robertson, you start losing a couple of games and your head's on the chopping block. Whereas Rassie Erasmus could probably go and lose 3-0 against the All Blacks and then maybe win the last one, and no one's going to be panicking for next year. That is not the kind of reputation and the favor you can buy overnight. And that is not something that happens by accident. There has been a very intentional creation of an environment and a product that is the Springboks, the narratives that we push, the chasing the sun, the press conferences, the stories, the players we've given the opportunities to, the players we've given made captain. Everything is intentional about the box. There is nothing that happens by mistake. It is all by design. And we've got the right architects. That's also a big part. We've got the right people in the right places to create the environment and to create the scenarios that make the Springboks a different level to the best. And I think that France, for example, are getting lots of things right, some things wrong. But they, France, New Zealand, and Ireland are the biggest threats to the box dominance. And obviously there are top three sides, but they've got the structures to back it up a bit more. They're a lot closer to what kind of we've achieved in SA Rugby than the other nations around the world. And at this stage, it's only getting stronger. The Bok brand is only expanding. The school sport brand is only expanding. The varsity brand is expanding. Your Curry Cup's getting a bit stronger. Your URC franchises are getting stronger. The products we're producing are getting better and bigger. More players going overseas. More players going and becoming professional rugby players. So the big question is, how does any other country start to come in and start to try and rival this? What do you think? Let me know down in the comments below. Smash a like on the video. Subscribe to the channel as well. Thank you very much for watching. I'll see you guys all very soon on the Stevie channel. And until then, enjoy.